Hello game fans and welcome to another interview at Game Anglia. I am with the legendary Rami Ismail and we're going to be talking all sorts of things from game marketing to game development. He is here to do a fireside chat at the event. So first of all I wanted to kick off by saying, sort of outside of making a great game, how would you advise sort of students and indie developers to get their game out there? What has worked for you?
Well, I think the main thing that you want to be focusing on is your work is just part of what you do to be a good game developer, right? And a lot of people, and especially a lot of students, tend to focus very, very much on the hard skills of making video games. Well, in reality, the craft of making a game is half hard skills, hard soft skills, and a large part of that involves communicating. It involves talking to people. It involves networking. It involves reaching out. It involves starting to think about the context in which your games exist, right? Because making a game is part of it, but then your game is going to go into this wider world that has all sorts of challenges that are not related to programming or art or design or any of those things. They're related to the market, to people, to communicating, to public relations, things like that. So when you make a game, you can start from many different places. You can start by doing market research. You can start just because you want to make a game. You can start with a little prototype, a game jam, something like it. At some point, you're going to have to start thinking about the context that your game is releasing in. So what kind of platforms are you going to be releasing on? And if you're going to be releasing on, say, Steam, you want to release on Steam, what kind of environment are you releasing your game into? And what kind of challenges exist for that? And now, I could give you an answer as to what I would do now. Because that would involve Twitch streamers, and it would involve emailing press, it would involve having a Twitter account, making a good store page, good screenshots, make a press kit, stuff like that. But the honest truth is that there's a way more structural answer to this, which is look at what the market is, look at how successful games are doing it, look at what fits your game, and then start thinking about what would work for yours. Okay. So more than here's a one-size-fits-all solution. It is what is unique about your game, and then when you're getting to the point of making the game a commercial product or like a freeware product, what steps do I have to take to stand out, to get attention, to make sure that the people who would like to play this game get to play this game? Sure. Because I think often people think of marketing as like, how do I convince people to play my game? Yeah. But that's not the point, right? The point is there are people out there. If you love making the game, there's people out there that want to play it. So how do you find those people?
Excellent. So what kind of, how do you split your time from development and marketing?
So between development and business, which is sort of like the overarching thing that marketing falls under, it's about 50-50 at the moment. So 50% of the time I'm a programmer. I grew up as a programmer. Since I was 6 years old, I've wanted to be a programmer. And that's how I started. That's I went to school for programming. When we started Vlambeer, I was the programmer. I just realized at some point somebody had to do the business. And my co-founder JW is not a business kind of person. Right. So I took on those roles. And at first it was very little, but as the company grew, more and more business stuff comes in. So instead of just being a programmer, now I also do community management, I do customer support, but I also do accounting, I do legal, I do team management, production, stuff like that. All of that falls under business at Vlambeer.
And so when you're planning your development cycle, do you then factor in the times for game jams, for events, for all these things? Is that in the Gantt chart, as it were?
We don't have that much of a scheduling method at Vlambeer because it's a very small team. We're just 2 people. Yeah. And then on top of that, we work with a number of freelancers. We try to keep good control of our freelancers because we found that freelancers tend to work better if they have deadlines, milestones, goals to hit. For us ourselves, we know what we want to do. We know how we want to do it. We don't really like putting a timer on things because we like to think that a game is done when it's done.
Yeah, it's ready when it's ready.
Obviously, there's as the producer, there are certain realities that we have to work with. So we have to work with the budget that we have, the time that we have. We have certain launch windows that we would like to hit, but as a producer, I like to work with best case, worst case scenarios. Yeah. So whatever happens, I make a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. So the best case scenario is everything goes super smooth, no problems, no delays whatsoever. So we can launch in February. Or worst case scenario is, we're going to be stuck in this game forever. It might never get done. So how do we deal with that? Are there assets that we can salvage, code that we can salvage? Is there a way we can pivot the game to something else or a different platform? So I'm always thinking and adapting. I think because Lambria is very much a creativity first studio, like a lot of what we try to do is we try to realize JW's vision for these simple, interesting, weird prototype designs. So for me, a large part of the challenge is how do you facilitate that without getting in his way, while still making a product that, will pay for our rent.
And does he ever sort of call you back saying, I haven't seen you in a month, can you come back and do some development work?
Well, interestingly enough, JW and I, we are very good colleagues, not really friends. We don't, it's hard, it sounds mean to say we don't like each other, but in a way that is actually absolutely true. We respect each other a lot. Yeah. I really like his work. I really like, I think he's one of the best designers I've ever met. We would not invite each other to each other's birthday party. Like, just not a thing. That's not the kind of friendship or collaboration we are. So if he doesn't see me for a month, I don't think he would reach out for me to come back or do anything. But yeah, occasionally we will ask each other, like, hey, there's this thing. It's a blocker for me. Like, could you resolve that somewhere in the next period of time? And then conversely, we also have a thing where if we feel the other person is kind of off or not doing their best work, we'll just ask about it and just go like, hey, are you okay? Like, do you need a week off, or do you want some time away from work? And because Lambria is such a small studio, we can take those risks. We can just say, like, okay, our burn rate effectively is a few thousand a month, and that's including the office and the travel and the events. And so, as a game studio, at some point you have to learn to work with numbers that are somewhat bigger than you would be used to in your personal life. Because to me, like, a few $1,000s sounds like a lot of money, but to Lambria as a games company, it's a month, right? So you kind of have to get used to numbers like that, and then at some point, you realize that with two people, the amount of spend you have every month is low enough that you can just go like, okay, you know what? How about you take 2 weeks off? Just go take a holiday, like, go see the world a bit. Don't work on the game, and then come back when you're ready. And it's a luxury that we've really had to fight for. Yeah. It's a luxury that we also we didn't realize was that important when we started. When we started, it was very much let's keep working hard as possible in the office every night. Don't go home. Crunch our way through everything, and it went well until something went poorly, and then it turned out we had no emotional resistance left. We had no energy left, so we burned out for about a year. It almost killed the studio. Right. And actually, a studio from Canada had to save us. Like, a studio from Canada offered us to port Super Crate Box to iOS, which made just enough money for us to survive, because otherwise that would have been it. Wow. So we just burned ourselves out.
And so then students are obviously going to start a two-person company themselves. They've just finished their third year, they've got ideas, got prototypes. Would you advise that they start sort of hitting the circuit in many ways, like getting out there with their prototype in the game jams and these in events like Game Anglia?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the thing is, there's two sides to game development. One is your game, and one is you. If your game is the best game ever and nobody knows you, it's not going to work. And even because a lot of people bring up stories like, oh, but what about Toby Fox and Undertale? Nobody really knows Toby Fox. He doesn't seem like a person that goes to events, and it's true. Like, he doesn't. Also, that's literally the only example you can give of a person like that, right? When people talk about success stories, they forget that for every success story, there's thousands of identical stories that were not successful. So I have a very particular story, and I would say that 90% of the things I've done are bad advice, and I would never recommend anybody to do what I did, because it's not a good idea. And it worked out for me, but I've talked to enough developers that did similar things to what I did, and it went awful, right? So I think one of the things that is most valuable is this idea of luck. Right, and a lot of people say, well, to be a good game developer, you need to make a good game, you have to get lucky. But when people say luck, they mean two different things, right? The one type of luck is you go to every event, you talk to everybody, you make contacts, you talk to your heroes, you send emails to people that might be interested, you make your game as good as well as possible, you market it, you pitch it, you go talk to publishers, you get every information you can, you take as much time and feedback from people that you look up to, and then you get lucky, right? That's one type of luck. The other type of luck is you're sitting in your apartment, at night working on your game, and somewhere overhead, like an airplane has trouble, and this guy jumps out with a parachute, but the parachute doesn't open, and he lands in a tree, but survives the impact because it's a soft tree, and then sees you, looks at you, and goes like, I am a multi-billionaire, I own this and this company, and I'm giving all of it to you because I'm just lucky to be alive, right? And those are both luck, and we forget that those are very different things. The type of luck that is common, and I say common, the type of luck that is more common is the type of luck that you work for. And that doesn't mean that if you work really hard, it still doesn't mean it'll work out. That's one of the sad truths about this industry in a weird way, is making a game is the same thing. You work really hard, and the harder you work, the better you prepare, the more often you get to flip a coin. But in the end, unless you get, heads, the game is not going to do well. So it's that type of risk. If you want to be an independent developer, you have to get comfortable with the fact that entrepreneurship is literally about risk. The entire idea of entrepreneurship is built on the idea that you take risk, and that can pay off, and it can backfire. But if you want to be an indie, you have to start getting comfortable with that.
And so with the students, they're going out, they're going to the game jams, they're going to the events. Is there any inexpensive ways that you found? Because you mentioned how $1,000 or £1,000 to sort of lose or burn is a lot at this point. So what kind of inexpensive ways have you found to get your message out there?
Well, some of the best ways I've found is if you have a game, submit it to awards. If your game gets selected, you might not be able to personally go to the event, or if it gets selected and you can afford it somehow, or there's some sort of diversity or award sponsorship, you might be able to go yourself. Either way, your game will be out there, and that means people will reach out.
Get the badge of honor, award nomination, award winner.
Volunteering is huge. If there's an event nearby and you can volunteer for a conference attendance or any other position that will help you be a volunteer at those events, usually comes with a free badge to be part of the event as well. It won't pay for your travel, but very often those conference badges are very expensive and somewhat valuable. The third one is, if you're comfortable with it, try seeing if public speaking is a thing for you, because that's honestly what happened to me. I'm not a public speaker.
Thrust into the light.
I just needed to get to events cheaply, and the way that I could go that didn't cost money was by speaking. So I just tried it, and then it turned out that it was something that I enjoyed and people enjoyed listening to me. So, for a lot of these things, there are ways around, and then obviously diversity initiatives nowadays very often also include economical diversity and geographical diversity. So for events like Train Jam in the US, just not being able to afford it actually qualifies you for the diversity program, which I think more and more games events are aware of that, that little leap, that little lack of attention to economical diversity. So whatever you do, if there's events nearby, check out every event. Like if you're here, we're in Ipswich. There are dozens of events nearby in like a $60 to $120 range, and some of those include events like Gamescom, which is actually kind of around the corner with an EasyJet flight or something. You're there for £80. And then if you can somehow arrange a place to sleep, or with some friends arrange a place to sleep.
EGX, Insomnia.
Here in the country there's enough to do, and then outside of the UK, on the European mainland, there's enough to do as well. So.
And you're also the creator of Press Kit. So
yes.
I have to say a huge thank you for that one, because as a games blogger, games journalist, I am so thankful for that service, because there's a lot of game developers out there that don't know what they're doing, and so just simply having that as a service is fantastic for us. Has anyone ever sort of offered to try and buy it off you? Because
yes.
From a marketing point of view, it is a bit of a gold mine. I've got a link at the bottom there. And have you obviously have never caved, but I suppose you've had offers.
No, I've had a lot of offers for it. I've had a lot of offers for Press Kit from the start, honestly. My philosophy with stuff like this is very much that if you're going to make a tool for fellow developers, if you're going to start a service for your fellow developers, when Press Kit was made, there was nothing like it.
Yeah.
So for me, the idea was very simple. You do it free, you do it first, you do it best. And then if anybody wants to offer a paid service, it has to be better than Press Kit.
Yeah.
So there are paid services.
Copycats.
Yeah, that are Press Kit. But if they don't at least offer the level of quality that Press Kit does, nobody's going to pay for it. because Presskit is free. So I kind of wanted to get ahead of that market of how do we ask indies to pay for a service that really should be free, and just made it free.
Yeah, so an education as well, isn't it? Just learning these are the fundamentals that you need.
And I think that should be free. I think that should not be behind the paywall. So whenever I try and create something, that's sort of my starting point. Is can it be first, can it be free, and can it be best? Because if anybody wants to, if anybody wants to charge for a service, they have to outdo me.
Yeah.
Which means that the higher I set the bar, the better it will be for the industry. And I think for a lot of tool creators, that's sort of the attitude they come from.
Yeah.
I just had so many questions about it that I ended up, kind of vocalizing it and figuring out why I did it the way I did. Very often in life, things that in hindsight seem like very good choices are just sort of automatic. You don't really. I didn't really think of Presskit as this thing that was going to have such an impact. It was not going to be like the de facto indie Presskit tool. I just thought it was a useful tool. But then in hindsight, you can kind of connect the dots backwards and be like, okay, this makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And you mentioned copycats. Now you've had a lot of issues with clones.
Yes.
So let's. We won't delve too much into it. But say for a student who's putting their game out there, there's going to be a lot of established studios that may just jump on that bandwagon. What advice can you give to these new indie devs who might find that their game's been cloned?
That's a really rough question because the honest answer is there's nothing you can do. And this is something we learned when we were creating Ridiculous Fishing, which was our Game of the Year iOS winner, 2013. And it was a game that was received very well. Economically, it did very well. Super good reviews. It turned our studio from a small indie studio into sort of like an indie powerhouse.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is in fighting the clone of Ridiculous Fishing that came out before we were done with the game, which probably did better financially than ours because they stole the idea and did it first. The thing that's fascinating is every legal expert we've talked to, every person we've talked to basically says the same thing, which is there's nothing you can do. So the one regret or the one mistake I think we've made with Ridiculous Fishing is that we tried to keep it quiet. So when the game was under development, we were very hush about it, and we were so excited to do like a big reveal. Here's the best fishing game about fishing with machine guns you've ever played. And we were so excited about doing it. And then when the clone hit, nobody knew we were working on Ridiculous Fishing.
Yeah.
And we had the luck that the clone was based on a Flash game that we had made 3 years earlier. So we could at least point to that and be like, look, they cloned that. But if they had stolen the idea from like a video or a trailer or a talk or something, we would have had nothing. So for me, the one thing I would tell students is to, if you have a product and it is something that is very easy to clone, either keep it entirely secret
or get it out there
and own it. And if you're going to keep it entirely secret, don't forget that as an indie, you don't have the marketing capacity to suddenly do a surprise announcement unless you're an established developer. And even as Vlambeer, I wouldn't try that, right? I would like to market my game a few months in advance. If you're just starting out, the secret thing is never going to work. Yeah. So you're basically, your only option is put it out there. And then don't forget, if your game gets cloned, it means one thing only. The game is good.
Yeah.
You made something good. Nobody's going to clone something bad. So if your game gets cloned, own that. Talk about that. Yeah. Reach out to press about it. Tell your story of how you're just a student, in this big industry, and now big company X has cloned your game. That story will get told. Yeah. People will listen to that story. And then, worst case, your game isn't a huge success because it got cloned. Yeah. But at least you'll be a little more known in the industry, and reach out to people that have gone through the same story. Reach out to me. Send me an email.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. And so you've mentioned some of the games that you've been working on, Ridiculous Fishing. So I noticed by your recent press release, you were saying that you're patching things, you're porting things, and you're sort of looking at the back catalogue, updating them. How come you decide to go for this route instead of go for something, a new title?
So I think the way we look at Vlambeer is we've always kind of liked the idea of all our games taking place in the same universe. So all of our games are sort of like the Vlambeer universe, and I think we kind of got tired of that universe. So we're kind of wrapping up that chapter. And in looking at it as a chapter, we realized that there's some outstanding things that we really should resolve. So There's some issues with Super Great Mox. There's some issues with Nuclear Throne. There's a trophy bug with Luftrausers, and we're looking at all of those and seeing how feasible it is to do that. That's obviously sort of a consideration. Like, we have to balance the amount of time it'll take to dive back into 2-year, 3-year, 4-year-old code and like fixing things. But we're trying to fix as much of the issues that we see that are outstanding, no matter how minor they are, so that when we start on the new chapter, for which we just announced our first new game, when we start on this new chapter, we can really say that the old chapter is done.
Yeah.
Right, and that we don't
tie the bow around it.
Yeah, just be done with it. And we released an art book recently, 120 Years of Vlambeer.
Fantastic.
That is the written history of this first chapter, and it's kind of fascinating. It was really fun for me to hold what is effectively like 8 years of my life, right? And a book about 8 years of my life. Hold that in the palm of your hand and be like, wow, that doesn't even weigh a kilo. Like, that's weird. But it's sort of the end of Vlambeer Chapter 1, and Vlambeer Chapter 2 will be a very different studio in some ways. We'll be focusing on a bit smaller project.
Right.
It won't be necessarily our primary focus for our full year. But I think as a studio, Vlambeer has always been a studio about statements. Whether the game is a statement or the business case is a statement, no matter what, there have to be statements, otherwise we just get bored. So we'll be making statements with our games, and I'm excited for what's coming up.
And is the tool set changing? Because I know you've had some issues with Game Maker and
yeah, I mean, we updated to Game Maker Studio 2, which Yo-Yo Games released. It's JW's tool of choice. My co-founder he's been using Game Maker since he was 13. He's a magician with it.
Yeah.
I'm not a Game Maker user per se, but I've learned as a programmer. I think curiosity and adaptability are two of your biggest strengths. So I've basically taught myself Game Maker. It's a fascinating prototyping tool. It's fast. I think the newer version, Game Maker Studio 2, is actually a lot more powerful and a lot more pleasant to my programmer like sensibilities than the first iteration of the software was. I think we'll just be using that. It's a lot better in support for other platforms as well. So if we want to release on PlayStation or Xbox or Switch, Game Maker Studio 2 supports those out of the box. So
there'll be no Nuclear Throne 3D.
I don't think we'll be doing
it's in the original Doom engine.
Yeah, we'll leave the 2D to 3D jump to the Risk of Rain guys. Like, they seem to be doing that quite well. I'm excited for Risk of Rain too, but for now, no, I think Vlambeer is JW's aesthetic is very much 2D, so I think for now you'll see us do 2D games.
Excellent. Okay, so this is my last question. I've been asking it to everybody that's doing the speaking and coming to the interviews, and it's all about time travel. So I think you've already touched upon it already, but if you could go back in time, meet your sort of 17-year-old self, just starting on their first tentative steps into game development and game design, what advice would you give to yourself all those years ago?
I mean, it kind of depends on what kind of time travel it is, isn't it? Like, does this like create a split reality, or does it change my current life? Or?
Well, I mean, it obviously will cause a ripple through time, but you could actually give this. It has to be game development related. You can't just suddenly say, "Oh, these are lottery numbers for the next 5 years."
Well, you know what? Here's the thing. Like, and this is something I very strongly believe. I think everything I've done, including the mistakes I've made, are part of what made me who I am now.
Yeah.
So I'd actually be terrified of talking to 17-year-old me, because what if something I said would stop me from making a mistake that turns out to be really important?
Yeah, not even the cloning thing. So ridiculous.
Yeah, no, because the cloning thing, like, the cloning was really bad, but the way we handled it as a studio was part of why that game got the attention it did.
And it changed the industry.
It changed the industry as a whole. It changed the direction we talk about creative work versus clones. It made it a topic, and I'm very proud of how we handled that. So I don't know, like, here's the thing about choices, right? Because people ask me, like, what is your biggest regret? And I'll say, as basically like co-founder of Vlambeer, I make a lot of big choices about money, about projects, about greenlighting things. And people ask me, like, what are your biggest regrets? And I've made a lot of mistakes. I once, for a talk, I calculated how much money I must have cost Vlambeer just by being inexperienced or, not knowing the right thing. It must be over $1 million. Like, it's a lot of money. Even for a game studio, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I don't regret that. And the weird thing is, I think that's because the way I look at it is, at any given point in our life, if we make a choice, it's the best choice we can make. It's not like life comes to us and says you can choose A or B, and B is obviously worse, and that we just sit there and go like, well, let's do B then.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously we're going to pick the better choice.
Yeah.
It might be that we're not informed enough, that we don't have enough knowledge, that we didn't ask around enough. And that's a teaching moment. You learn from those.
Yeah.
I don't think the mistake is bad. So
it's almost like don't fear the mistake. So if you saw your younger self saying you're going to make mistakes,
yeah,
don't fear it.
And I wouldn't even tell him that, because I think the fear of mistakes was useful at one point of my life, and now the lack of fear of mistakes is good for this part of my life. I think in general, if you're a game developer, you have to be very comfortable with mistakes, because everything we do is iterative, right? So everything we do, from design to communicating to marketing to programming, everything is you try a thing. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, let's redo it.
Fail fast, fail often. Is that it?
Exactly. And then don't think of failure as like a thing you have to hold yourself, you have to punish yourself for. You have to hold yourself accountable. It's important that you take responsibility for the mistakes you make, that you learn from them, that you go back and evaluate them, that after a project you take a break and look at what went wrong, even if the project went great. But don't regret them. Regret is not, it's not a bad thing. It's also just not a useful thing. Like, accept that you made these mistakes, learn from them, move on.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's a really good point to leave it. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for coming to Game Anglia. And if this video has been useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and we'll be back with another interview very soon.